everybody for joining us this evening. I think this will be a really nice presentation. I hope you have your evening tea and cup of coffee and maybe a glass of wine if that's your thing. But we do have a little bit of Zoom etiquette here. We would like for you to keep all of your mics on muted, simply because with this number of people, we have a lot of background noise, household noise, etc. And it will make a much better opportunity to enjoy the presentation. All your videos are on, but of course, as you know, you can turn those off yourself. They can be controlled. I would like for you to open the chat box. This is where we'll be putting the questions for our speaker. I would like to ask you, if you can refrain, is to only put questions for your speakers, for the speaker in the chat box. It makes it really hard for us to sort through a lot of the other comments, et cetera, that people may have. Okay, and also one other thing, it will be recorded, and just wanted to let everybody know that. So Debbie, would you like to introduce our speaker, please?
Yes, I'd be delighted to. So first of all, I'm Debbie Gould, and I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Tennessee as of less than a week ago. Okay, I'm new to this. And I'm delighted that one of my first tasks is to introduce this speaker, because I'm really looking forward to hearing Kristin Eberhard. As you know, redistricting is a key element in everything we do, and it really shows in the work that Ms. Eberhard has done that she understands the links between democracy and everything else that happens in the community. She's known as a leading expert on electoral reform in the Pacific Northwest, and is also considered an authority on proportional representation as well as carbon pricing. She is the author of Becoming a Democracy: How We Can Fix the Electoral College, Gerrymandering, and Our Elections. She is currently working at Sightline Institute, which is a nonpartisan organization with a mission to make the Northwest a global model of sustainability with strong communities, a green economy, and a healthy environment. And again, to show how strong the linkage is between democracy and the environment, her title there is Director of Democracy and Climate, which I have to say is the very first time that I've ever seen that title for anyone, and I find that very exciting. Prior to her working at Sightline Institute, she led California climate change policy work at the Natural Resources Defense Council, and she's also taught courses on climate change and energy law at Stanford Law School and UCLA School of Law. She graduated with honors from Stanford University, cum laude from Duke University School of Law, and earned a Master's of Environmental Management from Duke's Nicholas School of the Environment. We're really delighted to hear you today, Kristin, to talk about redistricting and its impact on representation. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank all of you. I'm so glad to be here tonight to talk with you. And is everybody seeing my screen okay? Great.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I am actually a member of the League of Women Voters here in Oregon. And so as I was writing this book, I really kind of had the League in mind as an audience, and I ended every chapter with these discussion questions that I hope people would use at unit meetings. And I'm just delighted to be here to talk to fellow League members. And the book, Becoming a Democracy, it is now available as audiobook, ebook, print, and I hope that you will check it out. So this book, I looked at 10 proven solutions. So my criteria was no constitutional amendment needed, no change in the courts needed, and mostly things that can and are being implemented at the state and local level. So things that are proven and things that you can do at the state level. You don't have to have influence with Congress. So I'm going to focus in on just a few of those tonight. Automatic voter registration, vote by mail, restoring voter rights, and redistricting. But first, let me just kind of zoom back to why the book is called Becoming a Democracy, and what I mean by democracy in this context. So in a democracy, the power flows from the people. So we elect representatives, we are a representative democracy here in the United States, and they go to the Capitol and make decisions on our behalf, but ultimately they are supposed to be accountable to us. And our main mechanism for that accountability is elections, where we get to vote. And if, somebody's not doing a good job or we disagree with what they did, we can vote them out and put somebody else in. But for the people's power to really mean anything, those elections have to work. And that means that everybody needs to have a right to vote in those elections, a right to a voice in the campaigns that are, leading up to the elections, and a right to equal representation. Once you vote, your vote should matter just as much as anybody else's vote. And in the book, I kind of have a final chapter on the right to participate, which is the idea that maybe people should have more direct involvement in government beyond just voting and sending somebody else on their behalf. So most of the things we're going to talk about tonight are related to that right to vote. And I want to start out by saying, 2020, we had a record turnout, and we had, in particular, 100 million Americans voted by mail or early, which was a huge record. And so in some ways, things were working that year, or, things are working, but we really could have them work a lot better and have more people empowered every single year. And I'm from Oregon, so I was proud to hear Stacey Abrams say this. But in a real sense, Oregon has been a pioneer in honoring citizens' right to vote, and has been kind of being the guinea pig to try things out and see if they work, test them, road prove them. And now that there are things that other states can adopt, really knowing that they have proven themselves out elsewhere in the United States. So I'm going to talk a lot tonight about kind of what's happening at the state level, and probably a lot of you have seen the headlines that we have these, that we have these bills making their way through state legislatures restricting the right to vote. And I've highlighted Tennessee here because I did think it was interesting. There are not restrictive bills, at least as of this map making their way through the legislature in Tennessee, which is kind of interesting. But in other states, there's bills that are making it harder to register to vote. So eliminating same-day registration or automatic voter registration, that make it harder to stay registered. So, you have to go and register, you have to fill out the paperwork, prove your identity. And then some states will then, remove you from the voter rolls, and then you have to go register all over again. And then some of these bills are making it harder to vote. So you've registered, you've stayed registered, and now you go out to vote, and there's restricted hours, there's long lines, there's stringent voter ID laws that don't include legitimate IDs. And all of those things are some states are trying to make that harder. But the good news that you may not have heard is that there's actually 3 times as many expansive bills, sort of building on that success that we had in November, and helping more people vote every year. And here it's interesting, again, Tennessee actually has some expansive bills in the legislature. They are sponsored by Democrats, and the legislature is heavily Republican, but hey, there's Democrats making an effort to expand voting rights in Tennessee also. So let's, and those expansions are kind of just doing that, but saying, let's do automatic voter registration and same-day registration. Let's let people vote early or vote from home, and let's restore voting rights to people who have had them taken away due to a felony conviction. So let's dive into a couple of these solutions. So one is automatic voter registration. So the idea here is that if you go to a government agency and you prove your identity and your citizenship, they add you to the voter roll. Or alternatively, if your address has changed, they update your address for you. so that you're always up to date. And what this does is it's less paperwork, and a lot of the errors on our voter rolls are actually due to paperwork. It's clerical errors, you know, that somebody filled out a paper form and they turned it in to a clerk at the elections office, and that clerk translated it wrong when they were entering it into the database. So this automatic voter registration, where you're taking a record that the voter already has, you know, with the Department of Motor Vehicles or something else, and just transferring it to their voter registration, it reduces the chance for errors, that makes your voter rolls more accurate. And it means that more eligible voters are on the rolls. They don't fall through the cracks because they, you know, didn't register in time, and now they comes to election day and they are not allowed to vote. Automatic voter registration makes it much more likely that they will be able to vote when they when they show up. So this automatic voter registration kind of plays very well with another policy that I talk about in the book, which is the Electronic Registration Information Center, ERIC. That's an interstate program for updating voter rolls. So if you move from one state to the other and both those states are a member of ERIC, they'll update your address, you know, take you off the voter rolls in your old state, make sure that you're on the voter rolls in your new state, so that everything is up to date. Oops, I am so sorry. I scrolled wrong here. So their automatic voter registration is now in place in 20 states, and it works really well. And it, you know, it saves money, keeps your voter rolls accurate, which reduces the chance for any potential fraud, no matter how small. And so what we see, and let me orient you to this map. So the dark green states are states that already have automatic voter registration. The light green or gray ones don't. And then the little triangles are bills that have been introduced. So a triangle pointing up means a bill that has been introduced to introduce or expand automatic voter registration. A triangle pointing down means trying to roll back or take away automatic voter registration. And then the blue ones are bills sponsored by Democrats, and the red ones are sponsored by Republicans. And so you can see that Tennessee, Democrats have sponsored a bill to implement automatic voter registration here. And then I also circled Hawaii because Hawaii actually just passed it. Their legislature just agreed by a bipartisan margin to implement automatic voter registration there. So they will join the ranks of states that are doing it. So let's talk about vote by mail, or as I like to call it, vote at home. And the reason that I say that is because vote by mail kind of suggests that you're mailing your ballot in. And in states that do everything vote by mail, actually only about half of people mail their ballots in. The other half bring them in person and put them into a drop box or hand them over to a election worker. So it's not all happening by mail, but everybody is voting in the convenience of their home on their own time and bringing it back before election day. So in states where everybody has to show up in person on a Tuesday, it can result in really long lines. You're trying to get, you know, a lot of people through the polls in a single day. And those long lines can mean that some voters don't make it, you know, they don't make it through the line in time to vote, or they can't wait for that many hours. They've got to get back to work. They've got to take care of their kids. And so they don't vote. And those voices are lost, which is not something that anybody should want in democracy. Anybody who wants to vote, who shows up to vote, should be able to do that. So letting more people vote at home helps to reduce those lines on election day, because more people have already gotten their ballot in. And so it means more people are likely to actually vote. So here is my ballot on my kitchen table. I, you know, leisurely fill it out with a cup of tea. I look things up. I discuss it with my kids and with my husband, and it's a great experience. It feels like a good experience that I get to do this in the comfort of my home and turn it and take my time and turn it in. So almost all states allow voters to vote at home if they want to, allows them to request an absentee ballot if they want to. Tennessee is one of a few standouts that don't allow anybody to request an absentee ballot. And this election, a lot of the states that, were making it harder to get an absentee ballot actually temporarily made it easier. So all the highlighted states are ones that kind of moved to the left, and the left is making it easier to vote at home. And Tennessee is in that, making it hardest to vote at home, and didn't move even during the pandemic. So I understand that you are up against a bigger challenge with trying to make it easier to vote there. But the good thing is that there's a lot of movement towards making it easier, letting everybody request a ballot if they want to. So when you look at those states that don't allow one right now, that don't allow all voters to vote at home right now, many of them have bills introduced to allow it, including bipartisan bills in Missouri and in New York. So I expect and hope that we will have, even more voters who will be able to request an absentee ballot if they want, in future elections. So let's talk about restoring the right to vote. So the fact that we can take away the right to vote from somebody because they've been convicted of a felony was kind of a loophole in the 14th Amendment after the Civil War that said, okay, we are going to give men of color the right to vote, but states, you can take it away for certain reasons, such as felonies. And so some states kind of took advantage of that loophole to define felonies and then use that to disproportionately convict men of color of that felony and then take away their right to vote. And many states still do that. Oh, sorry, you know what? I'm actually going to go down to here. So the states that are the lightest green or gray, they say, after you've served your time in prison, you've served your time on parole, you've served your time on probation, we are still not going to give back your right to vote until you take some extra steps. You appeal to the governor, or you pay fines, or some other step must be taken. The lighter green ones say, okay, if you've served your time, you served your prison, you've served your parole, you served your probation, okay, now we'll give you back your right to vote. And then the next green says, look, once you're out of prison, once you are back in the community, you are a community member. And one of the things, your rights and responsibilities as a community member is voting. So we're going to give that back to you. And then Maine, Vermont, and DC say you can vote always, even when you are in jail serving your time for a felony conviction. So an interesting thing about this one is that it has bipartisan support. So you can see right there, automatic voter registration, only 38% of Republicans are now in favor of that. That was more years ago, but has now become much more partisan. But allowing people convicted of felonies to vote after serving their sentences, actually a majority of Republicans and almost all Democrats support that. And I just looking at this in a couple different ways. So, overall, not breaking down by party, 70% of Americans polled say they support letting people vote, and only 28% oppose. And then the support is stronger amongst younger Republicans. So you can see 63% of younger Republicans also support this. So it's something that has pretty good support already, and maybe will be something that gains even more momentum as some of those younger Republicans vote more often. And we can see that the bills to expand voting rights for people convicted of felonies are across the country, and there's only New York has a bill to make it actually worse for felons. So this is one reform that kind of gives me hope that there is such broad support. So let's talk a little bit about redistricting. And I know this is on everyone's mind. And here is this is a report from Represent Us. And I saw that somebody in the chat had put the link to the video about the gerrymander with Ed Helms. So this is the same group that put out that video, which is very funny. So there's a big risk of gerrymandering across the country coming up with this new round of redistricting. And this report sort of broke it out and said, can politicians control how the maps are drawn? And that is true in Tennessee. Can they draw those maps in secret? And then are they allowed to rig it for partisan goals? Is there anything stopping them from just blatantly drawing the maps for partisan advantage? And then are there any sort of legal standards that might allow a court challenge to challenge a map? And in Tennessee, there is a judicial review, but because there aren't really strong legal standards, it has not in the past resulted in any changes. So what can we do about all of this? So there is, of course, all of these things are things that can technically be changed at the state level, but as you're facing kind of an uphill battle in your state legislature, there is a federal bill that would sort of create a floor for all of these things. So the For the People Act, which is passed out of the House, the Senate is now considering it. In my opinion, one of the really important things that HR 1 does is just state that Americans have a right to vote, which I know is usually really surprising to people to find out that we don't technically have that. We have several amendments to the Constitution that say the right to vote shall not be abridged on account of law, on account of race, or on account of gender, or on account of age. But the Supreme Court has not in recent years interpreted that to mean we have a right to vote that should not be infringed. They have interpreted it very narrowly to say only for those reasons, but you can infringe upon it for other reasons. And so this bill would potentially really change a lot of the jurisprudence around voting rights by saying we have a right to vote that should not be infringed. It also just sets a floor for a lot of these policies that I talked about. So it says every state has to do automatic voter registration. States cannot purge people from the voter rolls without high quality data, such as from ERIC. They have to let anybody request an absentee ballot if they want. And they have to restore voting rights to people once they have served their time in prison. And then finally, super importantly, it mandates independent redistricting for every state for congressional races. And then there's another really important bill that has passed the House and is waiting in the Senate. So the part of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, an important thing it did was say that states with a history of racist laws and election laws couldn't change their election laws without getting pre-clearance from the federal government that they were not, in fact, further disenfranchising people of color. And the Supreme Court essentially gutted that in 2013, saying, you know what, the formula is outdated for deciding what a history of racial bias means. And so, it's 2013 now, the places that perhaps had a record of racial bias in 1965 might be different. Congress needs to update that formula. And until they update the formula, nobody needs pre-clearance from the federal government. So the House has updated the formula with the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and has passed it, but has not been able to get it through the Senate. And so for 8 years or for 7 years, there has been no pre-clearance requirement because the Senate has not passed this update that the Supreme Court asked for. And so that's part of why we've seen states doing things like tightening their voter ID laws and loosening their purge requirements, because they can do it without getting pre-clearance from the federal DOJ. So I want to talk about proportional representation because redistricting, the requirements in HR 1 for redistricting, they say it has to be an independent commission and it can't have partisan bias. But that's actually hard to accomplish with single winner districts. So in a single winner district, you can sort of make it compact, make it drawn around communities of interest, but then that results in districts being safe for one party or the other, and they're not competitive. And the way that people have distributed themselves makes that kind of a map inherently biased against Democrats, because there are more Democrats living in urban areas, and then it's more even between suburban and rural areas. And so that it's an inefficient use of voters when you draw compact districts. You get these huge blowouts for Democrats in those districts, and then very more small margins for Republicans in other districts, which means that the Democrats are wasting some of their votes and not getting representation proportional to their support with voters. And you can't solve that with an independent redistricting commission. You can make it a little less bad, but the nature of single winner districts is that you're going to have a bias. And right now in the United States, just the way that we are divided, that bias is consistently towards the Republican Party. So the only way to really completely solve that is by having multi-winner districts and some form of proportional voting. So this is actually something that a lot of the founders really wanted, but they just didn't know how to do it. At the time, it didn't exist. So they were really worried about this idea of a two-party system. George Washington warned against it. John Adams said that the legislature should be in miniature a reflection of the voters. So they were trying to get towards this idea of proportional representation, but they just didn't have kind of the voting technology at the time. And it has since now pretty much every wealthy country that has written a constitution in the last 100 years has used proportional representation, which is this thing that just wasn't available at the time that our founders were writing the Constitution. So this is kind of splitting up voters along, the x-axis is more culturally liberal versus more culturally conservative, and then the up and down is more economically liberal, so supporting more minimum wage and more government supports for preschool or college. And then up at the top is more economically conservative, saying, no, let's just leave everybody to their own devices, and the government shouldn't be messing with that. And you can see kind of how voters are distributed. And, we have these kind of two big parties that sort of more or less cover those groups of voters. And, but what about these guys? What if we could have a proportional system where the voters could actually elect people who represented them in proportion to their numbers? And then there's, you can see there's kind of some overlap between these circles, where right now our two big parties are far apart and don't have a lot of overlap. And so they don't work together well on actually passing things. With another party, you might actually be able to have different coalitions that work together on different things. Maybe you have a coalition that works together on minimum wage. You have a coalition that works together on climate change. And if we want to get really crazy, we could think about, having actually more parties and more possibilities for working through things and actually getting things passed. As well as just having more people be actually represented and having their vote matter. And I know that this seems far-fetched for the United States, But there is, a great case study. New Zealand used to vote the way we do. They modeled their voting after after England, the way that we did. And they, like us, had two parties. And like us, they had one party that would often win more seats than it seemed to deserve just based on the vote count. That if you just take the votes and say, how does this translate into seats? We see right now that that Democrats have millions more votes in the Senate and the House than they have seats. So New Zealanders got sick of that. They said, this isn't fair. I don't feel like my vote is really mattering. I don't feel like it's translating into representation. And they had a blue ribbon panel look at the issue, and then they put it to the voters, and the voters adopted a system called mixed member proportional, where you have one vote for your local representative from a local district, and then one vote for your favorite party. And the result is you still have two sort of big parties, but there's also some other parties that can gain representation. Overall, the results are fair, and they're able to get stuff done. And this is the native people of New Zealand. They had some reserved seats up until this change. So they always got, their reserved seats, but not more. And they made up more than 5% of the population. So they, deserved more. And once this proportional system was put into place, they consistently gained more representation. And similarly, women gained more representation once the system was put into place. So this is kind of what a ballot would look like. You have one vote for your favorite candidate and one vote for your favorite party. And there is, in fact, a federal bill to do this at the federal level. It's called the Fair Representation Act. It's instead of having single winner districts, you have districts that elect 3 representatives at a time. And the results are that the redistricting process is less fraught because the lines aren't choosing the people, the voters are choosing their representatives, which is something that, right now the redistricting is so important because those lines really matter for choosing representatives, no matter what the voters say. So thanks so much for listening to me, and I would love to just talk more and hear what your questions and thoughts are.
Thank you very much, Kristin. That was really great. I'm sure people have questions. Please put them in your chat box, and Kaylin will transcribe them over to our speaker.
Ms. Eberhard, we have our first question. Does ranked choice voting play a part in any of this?
Yes. So that proportional representation that I was talking about, I showed you the New Zealand ballot, but there's another way of doing it that Australia and Ireland do, which is to use a ranked choice ballot. So it's a similar thing where you have like a 3-winner district, and you use a ranked ballot to find the 3 most popular candidates in that district. And the result is that any group of people making up about 1/3 of the voters in that district will have the power to elect one of those 3 representatives using a ranked ballot. So people who are in the minority in a district right now can't get representation in that district because you have to get to a majority. But with proportional representation, your 3 representatives would represent the diversity of your district.
Thank you. And could you explain proportional representation again?
Yeah. So the big idea for proportional representation is just that your legislature is going to reflect the diversity of your voters. So if 20% of your voters want a working families candidate or a libertarian candidate or a Green Party candidate, then those candidates will win 20% of the seats. And if, the Republicans win 40% of the votes, they get 40% of the seats. If the Democrats win 45%, they get 45%. So that's the goal of what you're trying to get to. The way that you get there, it can be different. So there's the New Zealand model of you get one vote for a person, your favorite local person, and one vote for your favorite party. There's the ranked choice model where you get to rank candidates. There's also a list model where the candidates are listed by party, and then you vote for the one candidate that you like best. So there's lots of different ways of getting there, but the big idea is just that your votes translate proportionally to representation.
Has single district voting been considered in state for congressional seats?
I'm sorry, ask it again.
Okay, I think I read it odd. Has single district voting been considered in a state for congressional seats?
That's what we all use for congressional seats. So your congressperson, comes from your district, and they're the one person who wins from that district. And that is not in the Constitution, but it is mandated by federal law. And so for a state to change that, we would first have to change that federal law to just let states try using proportional representation.
What are the status and prospects for the Fair Representation Act?
The Fair Representation Act, it has some sponsors, but it's not likely to pass anytime soon. We probably need more cities and states to adopt some kind of proportional representation and ranked choice voting in order to build people's confidence in the system before we go federal with it. So the federal bill is kind of to have that conversation, to let people know that it's an option. But usually the way that big changes like that happen is they bubble up from some experiences at the state and local levels first. And we do have, Maine and Alaska are both using ranked choice voting. It's single winner ranked choice voting, so you don't get the same proportional results, but it's at least giving voters experience with that idea of ranking your candidates.
Okay. With proportional voting, when you vote for a party, is the choice of representation from that party?
So, like I said, there's different ways, so if you have a ranked ballot for proportional representation, the candidates are listed on the ballot with their party, and then you can rank them so that, they're choosing what party to be in. But there is a method where the candidates get listed by party. And if you vote for a candidate from a party, then if they were really popular, their extra votes will go to the next person in that party list. And it sounds, I know that might sound a little party centric to Americans, but it actually has this interesting benefit of letting new people be able to run more easily. So the way that we do it now, incumbents almost always win. So if you're an incumbent, if you have name recognition or you have the network, in like 85% of races, you're a shoo-in to win. And so it's very hard if you're a person who's wanting to come up through politics in that district, you have to wait until the incumbent is gone. And who knows how long that could be. And you don't get that experience of being a junior legislator. So this party list, interestingly, what it does is let's say you have an incumbent and they win, 85% of the vote because they're the one that everybody knows their name. But the party has said, well, our next favorite candidate is this one. So voters, you get to choose your favorite candidate, but then if they just have this huge overage, their votes will go to the next most popular person in their party, which gives a more junior or new person this chance to sort of get into the system in a district where that party is very popular and get a chance to like be a legislator. And also it means that then that incumbent doesn't need to be threatened by this new upstart, this kind of, new blood coming in. Whereas the way we have it, an incumbent is trying to squash that person down. They don't want them to beat them. And this makes them partners, that the incumbent can kind of take that person under the wing and support their campaign and support them coming into the legislature and be their mentor rather than trying to push them out.
Okay, so a more collaborative approach.
Yeah.
How embedded is a two-party system in our Constitution? Would this require a constitutional amendment?
No, this is a great thing about this. It is not in the Constitution that we need to vote this way, and we do not need to change the Constitution. It's just a law. And so that it's a law, a congressional law that was passed in 1967 saying we have to use single winner districts. It's not even that long, right? 1967. And all we have to do is change that law. No constitutional amendment needed.
Tennessee is proposing 3 Chancery judges to have final say in redistricting, but they are appointed by a Republican governor. How do you address this?
So that it would be better to have a truly independent commission. And that is what HR 1, if it were to pass, it would require Tennessee to have an independent commission, and it sort of lays out the requirements for making sure that those aren't just party hacks on the independent commission. It has some requirements for membership in that commission, and also some requirements for the final result, that the final result not heavily favor one party over the other. So unfortunately, it sounds like that 3-judge appointed panel would not fix problems with partisan gerrymandering, but an independent commission would make a much bigger difference.
Many don't trust the election computers to count votes. Why do you think that people will trust proportional representation?
Yeah, so definitely having a physical ballot is kind of the gold standard. And this is, actually this huge benefit of voting at home is that you're not feeding your vote into a machine. It's a physical ballot that you mark yourself, and then that's there to be counted. So would people trust the machine? So it's true of proportional representation, you're feeding it into a machine and the machine is counting it. But as long as you have that paper backup, if anybody had a question about that, you could do an audit, you can do a hand count, you can double check the computer, and you don't have to just rely on it, and say, oh, well, it spit out this answer and we can't verify that.
Do you have any advice on messaging in local areas to get people interested in adopting the proportional representation for city or county offices?
Yeah, I'm working with a coalition right now in Portland, Oregon, on trying to get the city to adopt proportional representation. And I mean, I think, what's going to resonate is going to be different in every place. But the thing that has resonated here is that it's actually kind of interesting. It resonates with 2 very distinct communities here in Portland. So one is people of color who make up about 1/3 of Portlanders, but until just the most recent election, never won an election. There were no elected people of color on the council for 100 years. And so and then also Portland, people are very spread out. There's not like a neighborhood where you could draw a district and say, oh, this is going to be the Latino or the Asian American or the African American district. They're spread out. So you can't like draw a district around them. And so they're seeing like, hey, we can't get representation. and proportional representation promises that to them, because it would, if that is in fact a voting block of about one third of the voters who want a representative who looks like them, under a proportional system, they would get that. But interestingly, so the messaging that has worked with them is like, do you see yourself on council? Do you feel like your life experience is being reflected? And if not, we need to make a change to make sure that you can consistently get the representation that you want. The other community that is resonated with is actually the business community, because Portland is a pretty liberal city. And so in general, the people on council are pretty liberal, and actually the business community feels like they're not getting the representation they want. And so the idea for them that, hey, if there's business-minded voters make up 1/3 of the voters, you should get one seat on council. And it's not a majority, but at least it's a voice. That has really resonated with them too. So I think anybody who feels underrepresented, who feels like their voice doesn't matter, proportional representation can really speak to them.
Okay. And in proportional representation, how is the party representative chosen?
So yeah, it depends. So like, in a ranked choice system, the party doesn't choose. The candidates get to choose which party they affiliate with. In a list system, the party is going to choose who goes on to that list. And then the voter chooses who they like on that list, but the party chooses the list. So different ways of getting there. It could be that for Americans, they want to make sure that the parties aren't in control, in which case the ranked choice voting may be more appealing.
Do any countries besides New Zealand use proportional representation?
Yeah. Most of Europe, so Germany, Finland, Sweden, Estonia. I have a map, but I'm not thinking of all the names, but basically almost all of Europe uses it. Several Asian countries use it. It's basically any country that has written a constitution in the last 50 years. For the most part, this is the system that even American scholars recommend. They don't recommend the American system.
Fractional redistribution is going to be even more confusing to most voters. How could voters gain confidence in that system?
I assume that this is somebody who's talking about single transferable vote and fractional redistribution. So it's definitely true that when you start talking about all the mechanics of how the counting works, that's something that people are like, oh my God, I don't want to talk about fractions. For campaigns that are trying to pass proportional representation, staying focused on what it means for the voter. So you're going to get a ranked ballot, and you're going to be able to rank your options. You can rank one, or you can rank as many as you want, and that's what it looks like to you. And then what it feels like is that the end result is you will, in almost all cases, have somebody who you voted for going to the Capitol on your behalf. So like right now, if you're in a district where you're in the minority, right? So if you're a Democrat in a Republican district, you can vote until the cows come home, and you are never going to send a Democrat to the Capitol on your behalf. But with a proportional system, almost always you will have at least one of the people going from your district will be somebody who you personally voted for. So your vote matters, and you get represented. Talking about the fractions is probably not something you want to do, and it doesn't, it shouldn't matter to the regular voter, as long as you know that your election officials are in charge of this, that there's an audit of the process. That's what you need to know, not exactly how your election official is doing all of the counting.
What is the rationale between legislation that prohibits giving food and drink to voters standing in line?
You're asking me to get into the minds of the Georgian legislature. So my best understanding of the giving them the biggest benefit of the doubt is that there is a fear that candidates or parties will be unduly influencing voters when they are in a vulnerable position of waiting in line to vote, and that they'll come and give them a branded water bottle, and then they'll be like, oh man, that guy must have been really nice, he gave me this water bottle, and then they go and vote for that person once they're in the voting booth. That's the most generous possible interpretation I can give. The less generous and more realistic interpretation is that in general, the lines in Georgia have tended to be in places that are more heavily people of color, more heavily Democrats. The whiter, more suburban counties don't have long lines, and so you don't have to worry about getting water in the line. And they're trying to make it unpleasant for those voters in hopes that they will go home and not cast their vote, which is is hard to believe that we have elected officials still who are making their platform trying to discourage people from voting rather than trying to win over and serve voters.
Thank you for your responses. And those are all the questions I've read. And if I've missed any, please let me know.
I think that's it for the questions. Does anyone have any other comments that they want to add? This has been I have to say that Tennessee has enough issues going on right now that we just want to be one of the dark green states. We certainly feel that there are so many issues. This is a very challenging thought for us, very thought-provoking for us to imagine a situation like this, and are looking forward to hearing about potential successes on the West Coast. And we hope that you'll let us know if this passes in Portland so that we can turn to that and follow it and see how effective that would be in expand representation. So it's really wonderful to have this opportunity to dream about this.
Yeah. And I should mention that there are 2 local wins on proportional representation recently. East Point, Michigan, and Albany, California are both cities that have passed and implemented it recently. So things might be challenging at the state level, but you could think about making changes at the local level, and then that kind of, gives people the experience of having their vote really matter in their local election. Yes.
So, I think that anything we do that helps people feel that their vote counts is a really powerful motivator for more people to vote. So that's really wonderful. So we really appreciate you taking the time today, and thank you very much for giving us so much food for thought. Yeah. Is there somebody who had a comment? Oh, okay. And we will be sending out notifications about our next webinar on redistricting, which will be May 14th with Dr. David Padgett from Tennessee State University. And he will be talking about the concept of communities of interest and what it looks like and why it's important in thinking about that concept in redistricting and developing our future maps for the next 10 years in Tennessee. So thank you again, Kristin. We really appreciate you coming and giving us so much food for thought about what we could envision in the future.
Great, thank you so much. And I put the link to more information about the book in case you're interested.
Thank you, Chris. Take care.
Thank you so much. Bye.